Alright, this video is meant to be an olive branch to secular-minded individuals somewhat, to help them believe in Jesus and God and so on. If you're a traditional Christian, good for you, that's what I like. But this is one of those things that haunted me for a while. My friend once said, Jesus is a fraud like myself. And I know for a fact, because I actually tried to do it, when I thought I was the Antichrist, I tried to game end for God's justice. And when I thought God was telling me that I could end myself and go to hell and it would save everyone else, I was like, okay, sign me up, I'll game end for that, no problem. So how can Jesus be a hypocrite if I am too, and God be good, and so on? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, okay, maybe, eventually I kind of came across this possibility. And remember, this is an olive branch to the secular-minded. If you're a proper Christian believer, then you don't have to believe this. I want you to believe what you already believe. But for the secular-minded, maybe what happened is Jesus fell into a coma for 3 days in the tomb from his wounds, and then got out of it for a while, and spent about 40 days with his friends and so on before walking into the haze of the desert, which would be kind of cloudy in a sense, and disappearing and so on. And that would be into heaven and so on. But he would actually have physically gone into the desert, collapsed, died, and his corpse would have rotted. Now, some people will be like, okay, how is that an olive branch to seculars while still believing in Jesus? And basically, the point of Jesus is he is the truth, the way, and the life, and he is the Messiah. He's the chosen one of God above all others. But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, well, if you don't believe in Jesus as literally God descended from heaven and so on, maybe you can believe in Jesus this way, which is closer, but not exactly the Christian formulation, which may be beyond you. So I'm trying to give an option here, but point towards traditional Christian view of Jesus as appropriate. And then, of course, the question then is, how can Jesus be the truth if his myth is based on falsehoods? And the answer is, Jesus was an actor of God's in the divine theodrama, which means God drama. He is the chosen one of God to play out wisdom and self-sacrifice, like Jordan Peterson bangs on about, and to showcase in other people's limited experience minds what's going to happen to them. Because God formulated a solid physical world, and nobody rises from the dead again who's been dead for 3 days. But there is a heaven, and this is his way of demonstrating that through a play that is then realized once Jesus physically dies in the way that I characterized before. So and if you think about it like this, evolutionarily and historically and so on, Jesus existed and showcased this at a time when, if you didn't believe it was literal magic, you wouldn't believe it's possible in any reality whatsoever. But now that we don't believe in magic anymore, particularly, or somewhat less, I think, sort of. I mean, there's some arguments whether we do or don't, but zap lightning bolts from the fingers, Palpatine style, or something, we don't believe in it generally, and so on. This is my formulation for the secular mind that doesn't believe in miracles like fire coming from heaven, unless you think it's a lightning bolt or something that just happened to do it at the right time for Jeremiah, or is it Jeremiah? Or not Jeremiah, was it? Might have been Jeremiah. Yeah, I think it was Jeremiah. I can't remember for sure. But like you can secularize the thought process a little bit. Um, but this is my explanation of a secular worldview meshed with the belief in God in a Christian sense, somewhat, and so on, coupled with my prophetic friend, who I know was prophetic by my experience of what he said and what actually happened, and so on, saying Jesus was a fraud. And it's a little like Batman in The Dark Knight saying, I killed those cops when he clearly didn't, to save Harvey Dent from shame so that the bad guys would be locked up, who were actually bad guys, and the only reason they'd be let go is because Harvey Dent was shamed. Um, and the thing is, it's not just a noble lie, it's an acting out of a greater truth through a fiction and so on. Sort of like how Jordan Peterson says stories are more real than individual experiences because they're the common thread through multiple individual experiences. Like that's what a play is supposed to do, and so on. So when I'm saying Jesus is an actor in this sense, possibly, and if my prophetic friend was correct at all, is Jesus was the chosen one of God, the Messiah, the way, the truth, and the life, in basically every single way possible, except for taking on the sins of the world literally, and except for going to heaven and floating off physically off the ground into the clouds, and disappearing into an alternate dimension of heaven and so on. And those are play acted for us. And Christians would kind of understand the idea of play acting for a greater truth in the sense of understanding that Jesus was not the summary of every sin on earth, even though he was treated like it by God. He was perfect, he was sinless, but he was treated like he had every sin. And that's almost like a playing action, like an actor in a play, in a sense. There's an element to that. And what I'm saying is the resurrection bit was a coma, then walking around for 40 days with everyone, and then walking into the haze of the desert, the clouds, and disappearing in the sun, into the distance, going to heaven and so on, and then physically dying, and so on. And now people will be like, oh, well, if he physically died again, then that means the promise of heaven wouldn't be real. And no, what I'm saying is if Jesus was a fraud in that sense, he was just playing out what God has in store for the rest of us once we physically die by showing us how we would look like properly, the way Batman says, I killed those cops, is the hero we needed and deserved, or the hero we needed but didn't deserve, or the hero we deserved but didn't need, or something. You know, he's like the hero we needed and deserved. But he's participating in a greater truth through a seeming trick and so on. And people will say God doesn't lie. But if you think about it, God has gradual revelation. So there's an element of greater truths and like people say facts are not the truth, right? Because the fact is like an individual expression of one event, but the truth is like the common thread of events and so on. So one fact is a molecule goes leftwards, but molecules can go left, right, up, down, and forwards and backwards, right? Like it's like the truth is bigger than just the one thing. And just because he says he's going right and he goes left doesn't mean there's a falsehood entirely. It's almost like if you think about how People play peekaboo with their babies, right? Like the baby thinks they're disappearing, but they're just covering their face, you know. And the adult knows that the baby thinks they're disappearing. So it's based on the limited perception of the other people in regards to Jesus, not left is right, up and down declaration. So if Jesus was a fraud in any sense, that's the sense I would put it in. And this means that, yes, that means physical death is an inevitability. No one's going to heaven without dying first. But Jesus was showing us through his crucifixion and life and quote unquote resurrection and experience with his fellows and apostles and disciples, the reality of God through playing out as an actor in the best theo drama or God drama to ever happen. And that's the only way that I'm willing to entertain Jesus as any sort of fraud whatsoever. And even then, I wouldn't necessarily personally call it a fraud, although I would credit my friend in the same sense of this potential for Jesus if the secularists have anything to be truthful about in their worldview. That my friend saying Jesus is a fraud when he meant Jesus was acting out what God has in store for the rest of us as well. Even if he didn't experience it when people thought he did. He experienced it 40 days later. So that he could stay on earth for a little bit longer to tell people about it and so on. And my friends calling Jesus a fraud when Jesus was playing out the theodrama for our benefit before experiencing it, the reality of it himself 40 days later, the 40 days that he was supposedly resurrected and walking around with his friends, then that would be the similar pattern, basically. And it's almost like a cosmic joke in a sense. And for a long time, I've been terrified of like being a cosmic joke in the sense of like being a buffoon and so on. And maybe I am, but you know, I'm an honest fool at least, like Pippin or Peregrine Took. But that is a part of God potentially, in principle, the way God could only allow Moses to view his backside or hidden face or like some sort of partial aspect to God than his fullness. And everyone else sees a bunch of fire and lightning and clouds and brimstone and stuff or something like that on the mountain. But that's not the fullness of God and so on. So they get an impression of God that is not the full impression of God. And what we're experiencing with Jesus is a much greater revelation of the nature of God properly and so on. And I think we're building off of Jesus a little bit maybe, but he's established the principles and the core principles that we operate by and so on. We're just detailing out his core principles going forwards for improvements. He's set the foundation and the walls and the roof, and we're just decorating the place to move in eventually, so to speak. So I would still honor Jesus, and I wouldn't just consider him a moral teacher. I would consider him an enactor of God's will and the chosen one of God and the Messiah and the way, the truth, and the life, and so on. But I'm throwing this out there as an olive branch to the very secular minded, to give them a hint of the value traditional Christians put in Jesus, hopefully attainable in the right direction in some sense by the secular minded and atheist minded and so on, in a way that doesn't necessarily violate their atheism and secularism entirely. So it nods to the human experience that many atheists and secularists have, but it also kind of provides an opening to believing in God and so on. That's my intentions with this particular thing. If you're a traditionalist Christian and you view Jesus in the traditional Christian way, keep doing that, and that's my suggestion. So yeah, I know this might ruffle some Christians the wrong way, but at the same time, this is what an olive branch to the secular atheist looks like. From someone who does believe in God and had a prophet tell him Jesus is a fraud, and gravitates towards Jesus being exactly the traditional Christian way, but often wobbles into this particular description's territory, because he's uncertain and so on. So this is the olive branch, in a way, to bring the secular atheist closer to the traditional Christian view. Yeah.